Hey folks, this is Kalani. I'm going to be looking at the new Jungle Wurm added. It's a new big world boss which has only been killed twice, I believe, at the recording of this. So this is the new world boss, this is the new permanent world boss, so this is going to stick around. Very much going to be a Tequatl-esque fight in that I assume quite a lot of people are going to ignore its existence past these few weeks, simply because this is a tough fight. And when I mean tough, 2 kills thus far should tell you just how tough. Even the TTS and TEQ guilds are having quite a few troubles with it. So, let's have a look exactly why. To start off, we're going to look at its spawn rate and how often you can fight this wormy. How often you can fight this little beast. It's got a 2-hour spawn, and it spawns on the hour, effectively. Note that this is going to be every odd hour, if you're in GMT time zones or anything with plus even of GMT. An easy way to figure this out is that it spawns alternate to the marionette. So if the marionette spawns the hour before, this hour coming is going to be Wurm. So marionette, Wurm, etc. Now, 5 to 10 minutes after the hour, the escorts should start. The escort is pretty lengthy and will probably take about 10 minutes, give or take, meaning the actual event can spawn as late as 20 minutes past the hour. Now, for the fight itself, each worm is invulnerable, and each has a different method or tactic to getting rid of that invulnerability so you can actually do damage to it. Now, when the worms are killed or decapitated, the timer will go down to 1 minute. Bear in mind, you've only got 14 minutes to do this entire event, but if you manage to kill or decapitate one of the worms, the timer shrinks all the way down to 1 minute, and in that time you have to kill the others. If it's not, if you don't kill the others, if the others are still alive after that minute expires, the event fails. Obviously, if you don't manage to do or kill any of them within the 14-minute timer for the entire event, it fails as well. Now, that's probably the biggest problem, is that the time is pretty restrictive, meaning you got to be on the ball with these tactics. Now, when all of them are killed or decapitated, it goes into the second phase. When you're in the second phase, you have to kill all the worm heads. Now, basically, the worm heads break off and start wriggling around. You need to kill all of those within a new 2-minute timer, and if you do that, you succeed. If you do not, you fail. So, that's kind of the fight in an overall shell. But let's have a look at some specifics, because some of these can be a little awkward. Now, as kind of a broad stroke across the entire event, you need at least 20 people for 2 of these worms. 2 of the worm tactics require a minimum of 20 people. 30 people makes them a damn sight easier. Increasing that to 50 people gives you an actual chance of downing this. So I'd probably aim for around 40 to 50 people on each worm, simply because you're going to want around 30 to run around doing the method or tactic, which requires, or rather gets rid of, the invulnerability on the worms. And then you've also got a lot of ads spawning around, so the rest of the group can take care of those. Now, we'll start with Crimson. This one's kind of interesting. Its special thing, or gimmick, or mechanic is phytotoxins. You'll have 3 colour-coded platforms of red, blue and yellow, and 3 colour-coded phytotoxin clouds. Essentially, you've got to match the phytotoxin cloud to the phytotoxin platform. So you run through a phytotoxin cloud, get the colour buff, and take it to the correct colour platform. When enough has been collected, all 3 platforms will charge. They'll remove the invulnerability on the worm, and you will be able to DPS it down. Note that all of these abilities which remove the invulnerability are timed, meaning that you're going to repeatedly do them in order to repeatedly make the worm vulnerable in order to get enough damage down on it. So you need to make the most of the time you get, which is very difficult, considering you only have a short amount of time to get to the worm, and pretty much everybody has to be on the worm when it goes vulnerable. So Crimson's relatively easy. It's probably the one which requires the least coordination, because you don't have to do all of them within a certain time limit. It's a charge deal. So as soon as they're fully charged, you can happily DPS the worm. Now, Going down to Cobalt, this is arguably the easiest one, but does require some minimal jumping skills. So the mechanic, I guess we'll go with, is bombs. What you need to do is gather the bombs or kegs, the powder kegs, from the supply depots nearby. You need to run them across several jumping puzzles, or one of them you just run across the sand, one of them you've got quite a bit of jumping, and the last one you run along a narrow rod, plank, whatever you want to call it. It's pretty narrow. You can't fall off. So if you go into the water with a keg, it removes it. If you get hit by the worm's slime attack with a keg, it removes it. So you got to dodge all these things and get the keg to the front of the worm. Now there's a big red arrow placing 20 kegs, so you need at least 20 people running this, 20 kegs at the same time at that spot, and then the worm will eat them and become vulnerable. Note that you cannot use anything which displaces or relocates you, so you can't use any blinks, anything like that. If you do, you'll lose the keg. Now that may be similar with phytotoxin, although I don't think it is, because you can use all of your weapon skills when you have a phytotoxin, so I'm not sure if relocating with blinks will remove that, but it might do, so that's something to watch out for. And that's pretty much the Cobalt. I mean, you repeatedly run the bombs, you DPS the worm, you run more bombs, you DPS the worm. Again, arguably the easiest one, but the jumping skills are there. So, going over to Amber, this is probably the most complicated one, although it's not too difficult, it just requires you to know what you're doing. So the Amber Worm, that special mechanic is worm attractant. Now, abominations will spawn and they'll have a debuff mark over their head. It's like a yellow bubble in a diamond. It's rather strange, but what you need to do is kill that abomination, and you need to be stacked underneath it when it explodes. Bear in mind, you can get knocked back a lot in all of these fights, meaning if you get knocked back from the abomination and it explodes, you're not going to get the debuff, and that's potentially going to be a wasted abomination. So a little bit of stability, rather, over at Amber does work wonders. Now you need to kill the abomination and make sure at least 20 people get the buff. Again, this is the one where you require at least 20 people for the mechanic. When you've got 20 people, run right next to the worm, again, a big red arrow. The worm will eat all the people, and they'll go inside the worm. What these people need to do is interact with the adventurer inside the worm, get his harpoon, shoot their way out of the worm, then when they're out, they need to use the last shot in their harpoon to shoot the worm. Now, every shot from this harpoon to the worm will remove a stack, and the worm has 20 stacks. So if 20 people don't get the harpoon and don't manage to get a shot off on the worm, it's going to take more than one attempt to get all of those stacks off, but thankfully the stacks don't seem to regenerate, which is nice. Now obviously when all 20 stacks are off, he becomes vulnerable and you DPS him down like a madman. Again, probably the most complicated one is probably the best way to explain it, but again, it's not too difficult. The main problem with these events is the coordination. You need to coordinate all the phytotoxins, and when the platforms are charged, you need to coordinate the Zerg to DPS the worm. You need to coordinate all the bombs to be dropped at similar intervals, so you need the 20 to be there at one time. They can get destroyed, so beelining the kegs is not a good idea. And again, when it becomes vulnerable, you need to make sure everyone's DPSing it. The Amber needs everybody to understand what they're doing and to do it. If people don't pick up the harpoon, you're never going to get the stacks off and you're never going to DPS the worm. But people should be aware when the worm is going vulnerable, meaning that they should be all stacked up, ready to DPS that worm as soon as it goes vulnerable, to make sure you got the max damage onto the worm that is possible for the group. Now, as a last little note, all of the worms do have various adds. So monsters are going to be spawning. You've got worm eggs, which I would recommend ranging down as quickly as possible if you've got a group dedicated to taking care of the adds. And worms do spawn. Now, if you don't kill the eggs, they'll spawn more worms, which is obviously not ideal. People need to try get rid of the worms as soon as possible, because if they start adding up, they're going to overwhelm you. The other ad is incredibly annoying. It's a partially digested husk, and they're all champions, and they have an insane amount of armor, meaning that they don't take a lot of damage from direct damage, but they do take a lot of damage from conditions, meaning if you've got very good condition necromancers, burning, rangers, guardians, warriors, that kind of thing, I guess condition feasts work really well as well. Anything with high condition damage, you are very much welcome at these fights, but you're probably going to be on duty for killing the husks. That's kind of all I can really say. I personally have not downed this yet. I am not lucky enough to be on one of the servers which has downed it, and I'll be frank, being there every 2 hours is, while not impossible, being there on the same server every 2 hours is kind of annoying because essentially you have to stay there. Now, as I say, it's interesting because none of these Wurm abilities are particularly difficult. They're relatively easy to learn, but the coordination required to complete this event is amazing. It really is, and I'm quite surprised that they threw something like this in. But don't be disheartened if you cannot complete the event, because ArenaNet has stated, or a developer has stated, they tuned the Wurm event for the top 5% of players. Meaning they obviously do not expect everybody to down it, and I do not think we'll see anything in the form of nerfs anytime soon. But as soon as you get all the tactics done and you've got enough damage, it should be relatively, I'm not going to say simple because it's not going to be, but it should be a lot easier than if you were doing it otherwise. But if you get the tactics down and you've got the damage, killing the worms, phase 1 is probably the hardest, because in phase 2 it's essentially another burn phase by the looks of things, but you've got 2 minutes to do it. Again, the timer is the restrictive component of the fight. So, I mean, I'd suggest going to one worm and practicing the tactics over and over if you're unsure. At least then you're going to be the best you can be at that one worm, meaning that that one worm is almost guaranteed to go down, and the others just have to work on theirs. So, that's all I've got for you right now. Kind of a high profile, rather, tactics discussion, but never mind. I hope it helps some folk who may be a little bit lost when it comes to the worm. So, thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.